All right, so in this video, we are going to wrap up the chapter on the Islamic empires. And here we're going to look at the Mughal Empire. So the Mughal Empire is what's going on in India. So this is India in time period 4. So when we come to India, we are dealing with the same types of people that we've been dealing with when we talked about the Ottoman Empire and the Safavid Empire and here in India. So in the 1500s, northern India dealt with periodic invasions from Turkic people. So this was an ongoing issue throughout Southwest Asia, the Middle East, Persia, northern India. We saw it in China. So this was an issue that many societies in Asia dealt with, or these periodic invasions from nomadic Turkic people. So one of these invasions was led by a guy named Zahir al-Din Muhammad. Although he was known better as Babur, which means the tiger. So that's what he went by. He was called Babur, and he is usually thought of as the founder of the Mughal Empire. Now, it's called Mughal because that is the Hindi word for Mongol. So it's the Mongols again. So these people that Zahir led, these people were related to the Mongols, and that's how they named the empire, the Mughal Empire. Now, Babur was we'd call him a soldier of fortune. And an adventurer. So he really wasn't like a leader. He was just he wanted to get rich. He wanted to go have fun. And he wanted to conquer his homeland, which is, I guess, what would now be in Afghanistan, kind of where Mahmud of Ghazni was from, if you remember back to him. So he wanted to conquer his homeland, which was in Afghanistan, but found it easier to just plunder northern India. Because if you remember the last time we talked about India, it was largely decentralized and controlled loosely by Delhi. So we're talking about the Sultanate of Delhi here. So he wanted to take over the land that he was from, but he really just took the path of least resistance and saw that northern India was decentralized, it was divided, and kind of loosely controlled by Delhi. So he went south instead of going north into Afghanistan and basically took over the city of Delhi. And he ruled there until 1530 when he died. So he kind of started the Mughal Empire, but it really didn't pick up until his grandson took over. So you really wouldn't have recognized the Mughal Empire as an empire until Babur's grandson took over. And he is known as Akbar the Great. And he's going to run the Mughal Empire from 1565 until 1605. He's going to do something that we don't often see in India. He's going to create a centralized state. This was something we don't normally see in India. India is usually pretty decentralized, but he's going to create a centralized state. More like China, with appointed bureaucrats. He's also going to be the first person to conquer all of India as he conquers Vijayanagar, which was in southern India. The other thing that Akbar is really known for is being religiously tolerant. So this was important, and we know why this is important, because there are a large number of Hindus and a Muslim minority ruling the country. In addition to a number of Jains and Sikhs, which I will get to in a minute. So Akbar understood that being religiously tolerant was important, because if you are intolerant, especially of the Hindus, intolerance would probably lead to a rebellion. And given that the Muslims who are running things are a minority, a rebellion would be disastrous. So you had to keep the other religious groups happy. You had to keep them tolerant. So we see a number of things that Akbar does in order to keep all of the religions happy. So unlike the other empires, I don't know why I capitalized that, like the other empires, Akbar did not impose the jizya. It would have been a disaster. So Akbar did not do it. He could not do it, and he could not get them to pay it. So he did not impose the jizya or the millet system like we saw in the Ottoman Empire. There's just too many non-Muslims. Another thing that he tried to do was create I guess we could call it a syncretic faith that united the people. He called this thing the divine faith. And what the divine faith was it used a commonality. It used something that all the people in India had in common, which was the emperor. As a religious unifier. So we all have the emperor in common. Why don't we worship the emperor as a divine figure? And then we don't have to worry about all of the differences in religion because we all share the emperor as a common unifier. This didn't take off. There is, however, and I'm going to put this over here as a side note, Sikhism, however, was a natural syncretism that wasn't forced on people. It just kind of naturally happened between Islam and Hinduism. And today, Sikhism is the 5th largest religion on the planet. It's also the newest major religion. It started right around the time that Babur was doing this stuff, kind of around the early 1500s. Late 1400s into the 1500s is when Sikhism started. So it's not like Akbar is doing something that wasn't unheard of. This was something that had happened kind of recently. But I think his problem was that he was the beneficiary of it as opposed to just kind of uniting something that was already happening. The other important Mughal leader that we need to pay attention to is a guy named Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb was Akbar's grandson. And he was in charge from 1659 to 1707. Now, he came to power, and he came to power through taking the throne from his father. Now, his father built the Taj Mahal that we mentioned in the last video as an example of monumental architecture. Now, what you might not know about the Taj Mahal is that Aurangzeb's father planned a second exact copy in black for himself. So the Taj Mahal was a tomb for, I guess, Aurangzeb's mother. And he planned a second one in black for himself. Now, this would have been a financial disaster because the first Taj Mahal was not cheap. So a second Taj Mahal would have bankrupted the Mughal Empire. So Aurangzeb overthrew his father and put him in jail. Didn't kill him, he put him in jail and took over. Now, Aurangzeb is usually thought of as the high point of the Mughal Empire. He extended Mughal control to include all of India. So India is now more or less united under Mughal control. The other thing that Aurangzeb did, and this would ultimately become the Mughals' downfall, or at least one of the reasons why the Mughals start to decline, is that he broke with Akbar's policies of religious tolerance. So here, he's going to impose the jizya on the non-Muslim population. He's also going to destroy Hindu temples, and, as you can imagine, this is going to lead to rebellions. Now, we're pretty much going to hit pause on this story here because we'll pick the story up of India in time period 5 because these rebellions will be used by the British to help, I guess, destabilize the Mughal Empire. And it's around this time where the British show up in India, and they're going to use these rebellions caused by Aurangzeb's lack of religious tolerance to further destabilize India and really get a foothold on the Indian subcontinent. Now, this is really not any different than what the Spanish were doing when they took over the Aztec and the Inca empires in the Western Hemisphere. So what I want to do to end this stuff on the Islamic empires is kind of do a quick circuit and talk about why did these empires decline. So let's look at some reasons for imperial decline. So these are going to apply to all of the empires, the Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire, and the Mughal Empire, which we just talked about. So one of the reasons is simple to understand. We get poor leadership. So like the Chinese, a lot of these leaders uh, just use their positions to live a life of luxury. So there were some that basically just took money and lived a good life. There were also some leaders that just shouldn't have been leaders. There are some people that just shouldn't have been leaders. So, for example, the Ottomans have, of all of the governments and states we've talked to, there are a lot of the greats and the magnificents. The Ottomans have a lot of really good names for their leaders, like Ibrahim the Crazy or Salim the Sot, and Sot is an old-fashioned word for a drunk. So some of these people just shouldn't have been in charge. Another reason why the empire started to decline is that there were a lot of religious tensions. So, in some cases, these are between religious leaders and political leaders. So the religious leaders and the political leaders don't get along. So, for example, in the Ottoman Empire, a bunch of conservative clerics opposed any new technologies. So they opposed things like the printing press or observatories. And these conservative clerics became very powerful, and they started to oppose the political leaders of the Ottoman Empire. These guys became known as Wahhabists. And they're still around, and they are a pretty powerful group in Saudi Arabia, which is a very conservative Islamic country in the Middle East today. So you've got these kinds of religious tensions, but you've also got religious tensions between religious groups. Like we just saw that. We saw that between the Muslims and the Hindus in the Mughal Empire. We could also see it between the Sunni and the Shia in the Ottoman and Safavid empires. So they're just not united. They're fighting amongst themselves. Another reason why these empires started to decline is that they had economic problems. When we first started talking about these empires, we asked ourselves, what was the result or the effect of the Europeans cutting the Islamic merchants out of the trade networks? Well, now we're going to see those in these economic problems. They're really running out of money. Big empires and big militaries are expensive, and they don't really have the money to keep those things going. Not to mention all of the wars that they're fighting. Those are expensive too. And so instead of trade, they started trying to bring in money in other ways, like through bribery or extortion. And those are just counterproductive and lead to more problems. Connected to these economic problems is that they are now, and I think we've mentioned this in previous videos, they've kind of flipped the relationship with the Europeans. In that now the Islamic empires are importing exotic goods and advanced technology, specifically guns, from Europe, when before it used to be the other way around. And so all of their money and influence is being shipped off to Europe. And on top of that, the guns they're getting from Europe are outdated. They're selling them like last year's weapons. The Europeans are innovating so quickly that they just sell all the old stuff to these guys and they keep all the best stuff for themselves. The last one is kind of a cultural thing, and this also applies to what happened in China. There was just a general unwillingness to accept that their culture, and this also applies to China, could learn from other cultures. Like, they had been on top for such a long time. They had been the leaders, the economic leaders of Eurasia, that there was this idea, this, maybe you might call it arrogance, that they couldn't learn from other people because they were on top. That definitely also applies to China, and was a reason why the Chinese are also going to start to decline as we move into time period 5. And so a lot of like scientific and technological innovation was ignored or even banned in some of these empires. And so it's no wonder that Europe, who wants to innovate and is hungry for change, blows right by these guys and starts to take over. And when we move into time period 5, we're going to see the Europeans start to take over places like India, and they're going to push the Ottomans out of Europe. But we'll worry about all of that stuff once we get into time period 5. So this is the end of the stuff on time period 4. This is also the end of the stuff on chapter 27. And when we start our next series of videos, we'll be right in the middle of time period 5. So until then, this is Mr. Nissen signing off.